welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library. Welcome, everybody, to Turn the Page, the podcast of the Syosset Public Library. Welcome back. Today, I'm here with Geoff Johns, who is he has quite a few hats he wears. Writer, screenwriter, producer, you name it, in comics and in movies, he's done it. I'm glad to bring him on here because he's worked with a lot of characters that are near and dear to my heart. And when this was proposed to me, I jumped on it because I'm like, yes, seeing the DC characters as a kid, a lot of my friends were Marvel. And DC was always the one I was defended to the death. I'm like, no, Superman's better. There's, those playground discussions you have of, who in a fight, Superman or Wolverine. It's no contest. In any case, so Geoff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. I felt the same way. I was always all my friends were Marvel that did read comics. But I love DC. I was always in DC. I think probably because the era I grew up in was right around the mid 80s when Crisis hit and they were relaunching everything, so I could buy Superman 1 and Justice League 1 and Flash 1 and they were really good. Like, they were great books.
Mm-hmm.
But I still read like Hulk and X-Men, and I love the Marvel characters too, but I gravitated more towards DC just because of the history and I felt like it was a great jumping on point for a new reader back then. But I'm happy to be here and talk about comics and writing, whatever.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, it was always, for me, with DC was, I think the first book I ever read comics-wise was Conan, that my friend was reading. And I got into Conan, and then I immediately went to a comic store one day and I was looking for Conan, and I see this character with this like cool white goatee, this metal stuff all on his arm and his bare chest. He's got a sword. He looks like really badass. And there was a character called the Warlord that became really the jumping on point for DC. And after that, I was like, oh, what's this? Oh, what's this? So
I love Warlord.
Yes, I would love, hopefully, if there's a God in heaven, we could bring him back. I would love
there's something almost as good. They're doing an omnibus of the Warlord.
Really?
I saw that on Amazon the other day. So your library, your library.
Okay, nice. Excellent. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get into writing for comics or just comics in general? And what was your journey like?
Sure. When I was very young, I just loved drawing. It started with that, kind of probably reading Sunday comics and drawing and watching animation on Saturdays. And I got into like old monster movies, and I was really into, it's funny because I just did this interview about Hyde Street, which is a horror book I write, and I was talking about Universal monsters, and I was like, wow, before I got into superheroes, I was really into monsters like Frankenstein and the Wolfman and things like that. They're toys and, reruns of the old features and stuff. But I was reading, I like the Super Friends, and I don't know which came first. I think the Super Friends, and my brother and I found an old box of comic books in my grandmother's attic in Detroit that belonged to my uncle. They're from the 60s. There are a lot of Supermans, Jimmy Olsen's, Lois Lane's, Batman, Detective, Flash, Green Lantern, Justice League, Metamorpho. I love Metamorpho. And then some Marvels like Fantastic Four and Daredevil. And my brother and I really enjoyed reading those. And I got into comics through that way. And then I got more and more into the stories and the comics. I found some at a drugstore back when they were in drugstores at Justice League. And my first real comic I remember buying and coveting was Batman the Outsiders 13, which is this wonderful single issue comic book by Mike Barr. And I forget who drew it, but I own an original page of art from it I found on like 20 years ago. And it was a great story about Batman was poisoned, and Alfred had to reveal to the outsiders Batman's origin. And the thing I was taken aback by was when the other outsiders found out that he watched his parents get murdered in front of him. They were so taken aback by it and felt bad for Batman. And I thought, what an amazing story this was. And I just got hooked on comics, and I started buying comics, and that just led to a lifelong appreciation and love for comic books, DC, the DC universe and superheroes specifically. But I also was into, Image Comics came up when I was in
Mhm.
school still, and so I was into Spawn and
Yeah.
Savage Dragon and Super Patriot, all those
Mhm.
great original Image titles. And Marvel, I read Peter David's Hulk religiously, and X-Men. I love the Mutant Massacre. Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man run, like all of that
Mhm.
era was wonderful. So I love all those characters, and I like genre in general, not just in comics, but in film and books. And and so it turned into a lifelong love. And I always had like a love of film and television and animation and stuff. And I was like, what do I want to kind of pursue as a career? And there were different things along the way, like an artist, a director, and I really settled on writing because I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed the storytelling,
Mhm.
and so, but I ended up pursuing. I went to Michigan State University pursuing film and screenwriting, but I also took some art classes, and I was always interested in writing comic books, and then after school, I moved out to Los Angeles and to pursue a career in entertainment. I wanted to be a screenwriter.
Mhm.
And I always thought that I would do work on like a superhero movie someday or a
Mhm.
superhero. Maybe there'd be one, right? I
Yeah.
didn't ever think there would be as many as there have been or TV
Right.
shows or whatever. And I lived in Burbank with three other people, shared an apartment with three other guys, and I remember I saved money. I had like $1,500 in my account, and I
Mhm.
saved money, and we would walk to the grocery store in Burbank, and we would buy a frozen pizza for $1 and a Coke, and that would be our dinner every night for like months.
Wow.
Um, and but I cold called my favorite director was Dick Donner because of Superman the movie,
Mhm.
Lethal Weapon movies, Omen,
Yeah.
The Goonies. I always admired Dick so much because he he could do any genre. He could do
Mhm.
horror, he could do superhero, he could do family, he could do action, he could do anything. He did the Twilight Zone episode, like this
Mhm.
wonderful Twilight Zone episode
Mhm.
with William Shatner and the Gremlin. He was kind of this amazing storyteller that was all from heart too, all from emotion. And I cold called his office one day looking for an internship, and
Mhm.
I got transferred to a few people. No one wanted to talk to this kid asking for an internship, and suddenly he picked up the phone. I heard this big booming voice, and he was like, "Hello," and I said, "Oh, I'm looking for an internship," and he said, he yelled at the people, "Someone get this kid an internship."
Mhm.
And I went to Warner Brothers the very next day I started this internship.
Mhm.
I remember I wore a Hulk tie because I love the Hulk. No one else wore a tie. Nobody wore a tie. I never wore a
Mhm.
tie again. It's the only time I wore it. But back being from Michigan, that's what you did, right?
Okay. Mhm.
And I started as a intern there, and I did that for a few months, and I saw like their list of what's on development. The X-Men was on development. I was so excited to see that. I read the original script. Iceman was in it. I was so excited because I love Iceman.
Mhm.
Anyway, that started a career where I became the PA for the office doing errands, and then Dick hired me as his assistant on a movie called Conspiracy Theory.
Oh yeah.
During that
Mhm.
time, my sister died in a plane crash in 1996 off Long Island, actually.
Mhm.
TWA
All
Flight
right.
800. People who are old enough will remember that.
Mhm. I do.
And that really affected me greatly. It changes you, right? Especially when someone's taken away that quickly. She was only 18 years old, my little sister. And coming out of that, I came home for a little bit, not very long, and Dick was awesome. He's like, "Your job's here whenever you come back, and take your time." And I
Mhm.
didn't. I probably should have taken more time, to be quite honest. But I came
Mhm.
back a few weeks later because I wanted to get back to work and kind of disappear into work. And I I pitched DC. I met some DC folks in New York when we were shooting Conspiracy Theory, and I pitched DC Stars and Stripe, which starred Stargirl,
Mhm.
named Courtney after my sister,
Mhm.
and the artist Lee Moder who I loved was jumped on board as an artist, and they greenlit it, and suddenly I was writing a comic for DC, a dream come true.
Mhm.
My biggest goal ever was to write the Flash. I always told my dad
Mhm.
my dream is to write the Flash comic book.
Mhm.
But that's kind of like the maybe long version, but or medium version of how I got into comics. I started out working for Dick Donner. I was writing Stars and Stripe on the weekend. And then that led to co-writing JSA. That led to pretty early on, Mark Waid had left Flash and they were having trouble finding someone to take it over. And I got hired by Joey Cavallari to write 6 issues of Flash. And I turned my first script in and he liked it enough. He called me and said, "Do you want to just stay on the book?" I said, "I'd love to." And I remember calling my dad saying, "Hey, I'm writing the Flash now. It's 26." He goes, "That's your dream job." I go, "I know." He goes, "Well, what are you going to do next?" I go, "I don't know. I have no idea." And so then my career, it's a long career after that of writing for DC. I started writing for games, like I wrote the Bible for the Sony MMO, the DC Universe thing. Games I never really was super interested in writing. I didn't find that a very everyone was great to work with, but I didn't love the narrative style of gaming for me back then. It felt more conceptual and less emotional, and I like writing emotional stories. But I got into some TV. I started writing for TV. I worked on Robot Chicken for a season.
Yes.
Worked on a short-lived Blade series, and I got then I was working freelance for Smallville. I wrote some episodes, and at the same time, I was writing some animation. I think I wrote an episode of Justice League Unlimited, and then I got into doing more of the media stuff. And I was still writing a ton of DC comics, Green Lantern, JSA, Superman, and around that time, I became part of Warner Brothers. They asked me to come in, essentially consult for them. And during that time, like all that stuff, I really skip ahead and go everything I worked on and went through that prepared me to showrun Stargirl. So I worked on the Flash show and Titans and all this other stuff, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, but everything that I did in film and TV and animation and comic books, when they were looking to do another show that was a younger superhero, and I mentioned Stargirl, and they were excited about it. I was like, I need to showrun that because I don't want anyone else doing Stargirl like that. Like the hard thing about all this stuff is that as a fan of DC, I have a very specific vision of what I see in my head for the characters. It's just my vision. It's just my, my perspective. And then they're always executed, the way others execute them. And I really wanted on Stargirl if there was going to be a TV show based on my sister's character, I had to do it. And so I pitched the show and left DC, pitched the show and went to showrun that show and did it for 3 seasons, 39 episodes. And that to me was like a full circle moment because it was 25 years later by the time we were done of introducing Stargirl. And I went from comic books to show running a show and manifesting this character. And at that point, I had felt really I had done everything I ever set out to do and more with DC characters. And it was time for a new challenge, which led to what we're doing now is Ghost Machine. And there's a whole story on how Ghost Machine formed and why and who and what we're doing at Image Comics. But that essentially brings us to the present day.
Okay. Wow. What a long, strange trip it's been.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Excellent. So in your writing, well, I guess it's obviously different, but in your writing for comics specifically, what is like the process like? I mean, you have this character or characters and there's sort of a Bible on them on what you can do, what you can't do. And do you just want to structure a narrative on that? How does, how do you sit down and flesh out a story?
Well, it's very different all the time, but the first thing I do is think about the emotion of it. What's the story really about?
Okay.
It's not about Green Lantern. It's about a human being, right? It's about a person. When I'm writing about Stargirl, it's not about superheroes. It's about a girl whose father left her when she was very young, and she's now stuck with a stepfather and has never really felt like she was wanted by a father figure. And the story of Stargirl is really one of blended families truly becoming one. And then you put the superhero stuff on it and with it, and it helps accentuate and amplify that storytelling. I do that in everything I've ever done. So with Green Lantern, I looked at Hal Jordan, who was, chosen because he could overcome fear, not because he was fearless, but he could overcome fear. And I wanted to look at what fear did, because fear is such a powerful energy source that you can't measure. You're like, how afraid are you? 10 decibels afraid or 20
Mhm.
decibels afraid? Like, how do you measure fear? How do
Mhm.
you quantify fear?
Yeah.
Fear is such a giant motivator for every living thing, yet you can't touch it. It's not tangible,
Right.
but it exists. And so I wanted to explore that, and that led to exploring other emotions. And Green Lantern became about, for me, about exploring the effects of emotions on us, the power of emotions. That's what it
Mhm.
was really about. And that's why it was such a fun book to write. And then having characters personify emotions like rage or
Right.
hope or love, like having characters that reflected what we all feel. And then adding great epic storytelling on top of it that only artists like Ivan Reis and Doug Mahnke and
Mhm.
Van Sciver and Carlos Pacheco could draw, right? Like it was beautiful, beautiful artwork that went with the books. When I approach a story, I always come from, why will I care about the story?
Mhm.
When I approached Aquaman, I looked at Aquaman and said, well, you know, my dad's Lebanese, my mom
Mhm.
is from Ohio,
Mhm.
a mixture of mostly Northern European, and it was two cultures. There's a big Lebanese community in Detroit, you
Mhm.
know, mostly based on food in my family.
Mhm.
But um, but I looked at Aquaman and I thought, well, his dad's a lighthouse keeper and his mom's the queen of Atlantis. There's
Mhm.
two culture clashes there, and Aquaman always felt like, well, people perceived him back then as a joke outside, you know, joke in Super Friends. Like Aquaman was kind of a joke.
Mhm. Fuck the fish.
It's hard to even remember that now because he's so not anymore. You
No,
know,
yeah, I
it's
remember
it's
that.
really funny. But I remember when I was writing the book in 2011, he was a joke to people.
Mhm.
And because I was told, don't write that book, go write Batman. Ivan Reis, who had done Green Lantern with me, and we're doing Hyde Street at Ghost Machine now, he and I want to do Aquaman, and we had great success with it. So much so, obviously, the movie is based off our book, and I worked on that. But he and I approached Aquaman emotionally as somebody who didn't feel like they belonged on land,
Mhm.
and didn't feel like they weren't accepted in the oceans, right? They felt of two cultures. He was of two cultures, but didn't belong to either one.
Mhm.
And so he was a bit of a lost character. And his arc for that book was actually understanding that he was not only was he not lost, he was the bridge between both. He was going to be the only thing that could keep these two cultures from destroying one another,
Mhm.
and he could even bring them together. And that to me was a great story, whether he's called Aquaman or not.
Mhm.
So every time I approach a story, it can be a grounded story of a girl who's facing, dealing with her mother remarrying, like
Mhm.
Stargirl, or it
Mhm.
can be a big epic one of, you know, a man who discovers he is the heir to the throne of Atlantis, and yet Atlantis doesn't want him.
Mhm.
In fact, there's people who'd rather kill him, and he's got to resolve that and solve a big conflict. So I always came from emotion on every single
Okay.
character I did. With DC, I would go and look at the character and then crack them open a little bit, look at their history. I mean, I've read every comic that they were in, so I knew
Mhm.
it. But I would look at it and say, well, why should I care about this character? Why should I care about their story? What do they feel that I can relate to? And it was very instinctual on the emotional level. It was
Mhm.
never, I never pulled out a book to go, which emotion should they feel or what should they have gone through? It was always kind of looking at their history. Like I looked at Captain Cold, and one of the things that struck me, I always loved the character,
Mhm.
was that he was a criminal who found this cold gun. Like he didn't invent it. He stole the plans and built it. And he only built it because suddenly he was this criminal in a city where there was a superhero, the Flash. And so
Mhm.
to survive, he had to do this. During this journey, his sister also got into crime, the Golden Glider. And when I was
Mhm.
writing the book, she was murdered.
Mhm.
And of course, I could relate to that. Someone who lost their sister. So I grabbed onto
Mhm.
Captain Cold pretty early in my career, and
Mhm.
I saw him as a very blue collar criminal.
Mhm.
Kind of, the rogues were kind of in the vein of Heat, and they were
Mhm.
all criminals who had weapons just to, you know, survive in a world where the Flash existed, and they had a code of ethics and everything. But Captain Cold also, like, the one of the issues I wrote was a single Captain Cold issue we built to. I love that issue still, where he
Mhm.
simply hunts down his sister's killer.
Mhm.
And it was very therapeutic for me to write that issue, because I wish my sister had a killer I could have hunted down,
Mhm.
but she didn't. It was an accident.
Yeah.
So every time I approach a character, you know, whether it's DC or in Ghost Machine, like
Mhm.
Geiger came from another emotional experience of being a father, and the lengths you would go to protect your family. Like, what would you do? And the
Mhm.
truth is pretty
Mhm.
violent stuff.
Mhm.
And that's what Geiger explores, is a man who's gone over the edge and become a monster to protect the people he loves, and he's trying to find or remember the man he used to be, and it's
Mhm.
this great struggle between sympathy and savagery that he has, because I find for a child, the love you have for a child is so powerful, and yet the primal instinct for protection you have is so powerful too. You're kind of overwhelmed by both. So
Mhm.
every character and story I ever have tackled, I've always come from that emotional point of view. And then I love visuals. I love the amplification of that kind of storytelling through
Mhm.
genre,
Right.
right? I just think you communicate it better. You're being more metaphorical than literal, which I always find more interesting to me.
Mhm.
And you're making it fun, so you can tell these great emotional stories with these big, bombastic, and visually exciting characters and worlds, and scenarios. I often find, like, for me, the worst superhero comics are ones that are just about superheroes,
Mhm.
and there
Mhm.
are so many of them.
Mhm.
I remember there's one character that they wanted me to revamp, and the story is told previously. That character could have been any other superhero that had a power. There was nothing special or unique to what stories they were telling. You could pull
Mhm.
that character out and plug in Firestorm, or plug in the Ray, or plug in
Mhm.
Aquaman. The character would be the stories would have been exactly the same. They weren't unique enough. And so I always was very conscious too of, like, what is a Superman story, what is a Aquaman story, what is a Green Lantern story, what is a Shazam story. They're very specific stories. What's a Justice Society of America story? They
Mhm.
have to hit on the themes that are unique to
Okay.
those, and unique and central to those characters. And creating characters like Redcoat,
Mhm.
working with Brian Hitch, who's an amazing storyteller all by himself. It's really easy to find that central core unit and then stay true to it and build something new. That
Mhm.
then I know what a Redcoat story is now. you
Mhm.
know 13 issues in, I know what a Redcoat story is.
Right.
And you can't put Geiger in a Redcoat story and it'll work the same.
Mhm.
They say something different about the human condition, and that's how I approach story. And a lot of it is by heart and by gut. I always say you write from four different places.
Mhm.
You write from your head, which too many people do,
Mhm.
but you need it. You write from your heart, which I think is the most important thing. And you write from your muscle, which is like what's cool and exciting.
Mhm.
And sometimes people lead with their muscle and they're just worried about what's cool and exciting, and that's always a bad movie,
Right.
bad
Yeah.
book, right? It's just all
Mhm.
noise and visuals.
Mhm.
And then you have your gut, which is unique to every individual human being, and that kind of checks everything. Does it feel right? And it's really hard. I know you got to listen to your gut, even when people say that's not right. If your gut's saying it is, you got to do it, because your gut is your own unique kind of tuning fork for everything.
Mhm.
Um, your head can trap you because you
Mhm.
overthink things. That's why people never finish a script. They start one, they never finish it. They never finish it because they're stuck in their head,
Okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
I always go for the emotion, because if you care about a character, you will follow them to the end of time.
Right.
If you feel something, if you're moved by a story, you feel something in the story, you will you will remember that story. You will remember that moment. I think the emotion of storytelling, specifically in superhero comic books, is hidden. Oftentimes, you won't remember why you liked that story, but you
Mhm.
liked it. But the
Mhm.
truth is, it's because it resonated something inside you, inside your heart, not just your head. Um, so I have a very specific way that I approach storytelling, both subconsciously and consciously. But for me, if it's not emotionally relevant, or if it's not about something other than superheroes or robots, or it's got to be about something, because that's why you tell stories, is to relate to other people, to communicate experiences with other people, to entertain, yes, but
Mhm.
that entertainment needs to come with something that will click inside somebody. So it can be a story about, and Grant Morrison's did it brilliantly with Animal Man, a superhero who is kind of obscure and unknown, but he turns it into one of the greatest, in my opinion, superhero comic books ever written.
Oh,
I
okay.
think I got like 3 different versions of it, right? Like,
Mhm.
because it's so good, I just want to keep buying it.
All right.
There's a handful of those runs I think that transcend superhero comics and become something emotionally iconic. And some of them are very well known, like Animal Man or
Mhm.
All Star Superman by Grant. Some of them lesser known, like The Golden Age by James Robinson, which I think is one of the greatest graphic novels ever written.
Oh,
Um,
writing
that
this
that
down.
is, it's,
I'm writing this down so I can go back to them and read that.
yeah. Oh, it's so good.
Definitely.
It's
Golden Age.
I that is, I think JSA The Golden Age by James and Paul Smith
Mhm.
is one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest graphic novels ever written. The fact that it is not more known is criminal to me. It should be up there with all of DC's greats, and DC should be promoting the hell out of that book.
Okay. Noted. Well,
Yeah.
something you mentioned about also with the characters is something I always like is that, sometimes you have that stereotypical villain who's just a villain because, I don't know, I want money or I'm greedy, I'm this. I love the ones, especially like say Sinestro doesn't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he thinks he's a bad guy. He thinks he's doing a good thing.
Well, Sinestro knows he's doing bad things, but it's
Uh-huh.
for good reason,
For good reason, right?
right? Sinestro, and I think that's why people, and look, when I started with the character, he was kind of a almost like a cliche mustache twirling villain.
Hmm. Yeah.
But the history he had, the fact that he trained Hal Jordan, well, that means at one point there was some mutual respect, and that to me is everything. That's the center of what how I perceive that relationship.
Hmm.
And that entire run is about them. My entire run is about those two. And the thing that I love about Sinestro, for me, the character that formulated in my head and on the page, thanks to Ivan and Doug and Ethan and Carlos again,
Hmm.
they that Sinestro character, the way he manifested into somebody who for he's been through a lot of tragedy and pain and betrayal. His point of view was very understandable, and his ultimate goal was actually admirable. But the way
Hmm.
he went about it, obviously, he was willing to do horrible things for it.
Right.
But that made him interesting to me. And one of my favorite things with Sinestro, and people have mentioned to me, multiple people have said, your last issue, Sinestro, last issue of Green Lantern, the moment they love the most, and I set it up way earlier in issues, is that Hal was going to ask Sinestro something and he didn't. And then finally he asked him in this final issue as they're having their final confrontation. And he says to Sinestro, he says, were we ever friends?
Hmm.
And Sinestro looks at him and he's honest with him. He says, Jordan, and he goes, Hal. It's the
Hmm.
first time I ever had him call him Hal.
Hmm.
And he says, the tragedy of all this is, he basically says, we'll always be friends.
Wow.
And that to me is so powerful.
Hmm.
Sinestro doesn't necessarily want to destroy Hal.
Hmm.
And he cares for this guy.
Hmm.
And there's that, and then then it kind of ends. He disappears. It's such a, to me, a wonderful, understated, nuanced, and yet complete emotional arc between those two. That moment in issue 20, and there's spreads of tons of Green Lanterns fighting and all this
Hmm.
stuff in issue 20. Green Lantern 20 is one of my favorite issues I've ever worked on. But
Hmm.
that moment is one of my favorite moments I've ever worked on. And that moment only works if you read the book for the entire 10-year run,
Right.
right? It really works. And that's why I
Hmm.
think people picked it out. But it's an emotional moment.
Hmm.
It's not a big spread, even though
Yeah.
there are those in there.
Hmm. Wow.
But yeah, Sinestro's a great character. I love that character.
Wow. So people would know, in addition to DC, Jeff is now doing Ghost Machine. Ghost Machine is a imprint under Image Comics. And can you tell us some about the characters that I've read some of the books? Junkyard Joe got me right here.
Oh,
Really love
thanks.
that one. I like Redcoat. It's
Thanks.
funny,
Yeah, it's funny.
and tragic at the same time. But tell us a little bit about that you're doing now.
Sure, sure. Well, Gary Frank, who I worked with on Superman, I actually started with him on Avengers way back when.
Mm-hmm.
Avengers, Superman, Batman, Shazam, Doomsday Clock. we worked, for over 20 years together, I think on almost 20 years on superheroes.
Mhm.
And it was around, we were finishing Doomsday Clock. It was 2019. And Gary, it was like 2018, we started talking. Gary wanted to do something other than superheroes. And I said, you know what? I've been talking to Eric Stevenson for years about Image. I was just leaving DC to go do Stargirl. I was in the
Mhm.
middle of it. And so we came up with Geiger. We talked a lot about it, came up with Geiger. And
Mhm.
we went and did it and had a great time doing it. And while we were doing it, there was just a different experience of creating and owning your own character.
Mhm.
You know, we had done so much for DC and spent so much of our talent and time on recreating their characters and loving it, enjoying it. And we really loved doing it. And we were really happy doing it. But there came a time, I think, like McFarlane and Eric and the others who founded Image, where we wanted to do our own thing. We wanted to tell stories that weren't straight superhero stories anymore. We wanted to create from the ground up brand new concepts, because by then it was starting to be like, hey, do you guys want to relaunch? I mean, we were asked, do you want to relaunch this character again or this
Mhm.
character again? And back when I relaunched Green Lantern, there had been like two Green Lantern ones in 70 years. And now
Mhm.
there have been like 15.
Right.
And it just was getting a little stale for us. The constant renumbering, the constant reboots, they
Mhm.
used to happen every 20, 30 years, and now they're happening every year.
Yes.
And that, as a reader for us, we were getting bored. And as a creator, you can imagine, hey,
Mhm.
can you reinvent this character yet again?
Right.
Um, and it was happening at an increasing speed, right? Like every no, like I'm surprised. Like I don't think there's a book. I mean, I think they're relaunching Batman again, but like our books are going to be on higher numbers than most of these other
Mhm.
characters that have been around for the since the 40s.
Right.
It's crazy. But we did Geiger. Eric Stevenson had been asking me to do something in Image. We had a great time. We were going to go do another run on a superhero, a longstanding superhero after that, but we had such a good time. We did Junkyard Joe next.
Mhm.
And while we were doing all this, I was talking to Brian Hitch, who was at Marvel, and he was feeling the same. He wanted to
Mhm.
do something new. And we started talking about Redcoat, just
Mhm.
the idea of Redcoat. And it is funny. It's funny you say that, Ralph, because at the first iteration of him, he was a little more serious.
Oh,
He was a
okay.
mercenary. And then, but as Brian and I got together and started working together, because we never had before, we just had so much fun. The
Mhm.
humor of it all leaked
Mhm.
into the character. It just became, because Brian and I just can't help but laugh when we're hanging out. And so
Mhm.
the character just kind of took this bigger than life personality. I love him for it. It's so funny, but it's
Mhm.
fun to write too. I love writing Redcoat. He's one of those rare characters that just talks to you. I don't have to do much, but show
Mhm.
up. But anyway, we started doing that. Then Jason Fabok and I had done Batman Three Jokers, and we sold over like 1 million copies of that.
Mhm.
It was really cool. We're really proud of that book. And Jay and I were like, well, what do you do to next? Do you do, like, they wanted us to do a sequel to it, and we're like, well, more sequels, more
Mhm.
reboots. And at first we were going to, and then we started talking about other ideas, and Rook started to formulate. While we were doing this, I was talking to people like Francis Manapul and Peter Tomasi and
Mhm.
Ivan Reese, and everybody was. Brad Anderson was amazing colorist. We call him the master of light on our books, and Rob Lee, best letter in the business, and
Mhm.
all these other people in the business, both creators and behind the scenes too. And we started just talking about, like, we'd all love to do something new. And we looked at Image as that inspiration. They did it over 30 years ago now, where they left and started their own company where they could create and own their characters. And what we wanted to do was look at everything we've done. It was kind of like when I worked on Stargirl. I took everything I learned from being a part of Warner Brothers, producing TV shows like The Flash and
Mhm.
Titans, movies like Aquaman and Wonder Woman, and then
Mhm.
and Shazam and everything, and then going to, like, looking at that entire experience. And I was able to show run Stargirl and try and make the show I wanted. And we had the same money, and I think our show looked, it was the top of the top in
Mhm.
terms of comparing them to the other shows. And so now we were looking at creating a company and saying, well, what would we do if we could do anything?
Right.
And not just in the comics, because that was really important and the most important, but also how would we formulate a company for us? And it was like, well, let's all own everything together. Let's all go in together
Mm-hmm.
as partners. Image went in together and they all owned their separate characters, which made sense for them at the time. For us, we had a lot more experience working together as a team,
Mm-hmm.
collaboration of writers and artists. And so we came together and we decided to form this company. And we did it very organically. We wanted to work with Image because they're the best out there. They are creator owned books. That Image
Mm-hmm.
Eye says it's creator owned.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no other company that's as clean and as pure with
Mm-hmm.
creators as Image Comics. There just isn't. It doesn't exist. That's what Image is there for, is to help support creators and help them get their books out into the world and their characters out into the world. So that was a no-brainer to be with Image because that's what inspired us in the first place. And we love Eric and everybody else there. And then it was like, okay, what books do we want to do? And they all came organically out of what we wanted, the stories we wanted to tell. When I said earlier they have to be about something, what did we
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about?
Right.
In the case of Redcoat, Brian and I talked about, well, how hard is it for somebody to change? And there's a great issue 7 with Albert Einstein. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read
Mm-hmm.
it, but really encapsulates the book and the purpose of the book.
Okay.
And Simon Pure. We want to take somebody who was very undeserving of immortality, because Redcoat's about a British Redcoat soldier that accidentally becomes immortal, and you follow his adventures through time. And he's a bit of a ne'er-do-well. He's
Mm-hmm.
selfish. He's undeserving in every way,
Right.
and yet we watch him slowly change. And it really is, how hard is it to become a better person and change and evolve and grow? And that's what Redcoat explores as we painted across the wonderful tapestry of American history and the
Mm-hmm.
secret, supernatural, magical lining that it was. And so we can explore characters like Albert Einstein, and Johnny Appleseed and Annie Oakley, all real characters, real people, and give them these wonderful, rich personalities, because we don't know a lot of them,
Mm-hmm.
and tell these stories about Redcoat. So each book was like that. Geiger, Redcoat, Rook
Mm-hmm.
Exodus, Hyde Street, The Rockefellers, Hornsby
Mm-hmm.
and Halo, First Ghost, The Soulless, like Sisterhood, all the books that we're
Right.
working on, Devour, came from somewhere very personal to tell. And so as we started to formulate all these ideas as a creative unit, we had a summit in October of 2023 in New York before the con, and we announced the company, where we
Mm-hmm.
all came together for the first time because we're spread out across the globe. And it was a wonderful thing to be in a room where we controlled how we wanted the company to run, what we wanted to do, the type of paper we were on, our publishing schedule, everything, who we worked with.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a young creative, you're just excited to be on the Flash, right? That's all you're excited about. I'm on the Flash.
Mm-hmm.
As you get more experience, you realize how important it is to be on the Flash working with people you like. I was very fortunate in that I got to work on the Flash with Scott Collins and Joey Cavalieri, and then Howard Porter after that. Had a great time working on that book because of the people I was working on. Not everything has been as smooth for everyone in the company. And so we were at a point in our careers where we knew what we wanted and we knew who we wanted to work with. And thus Ghost Machine developed out of that need to support one another and create stuff we were really proud of, and create an environment that was supportive of the creators that were part of it. Ghost Machine is unlike any other company because every other company is essentially a construct.
Mm-hmm.
It's an editorial construct,
Mm-hmm.
right? That has some ownership of IP, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
This is the actual creators that created are the company. This company doesn't exist without the creators.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a honeycomb designed for all the bees to die and other bees can come and just fill it in.
Right.
And that's, that kind of is what a lot of the other companies are. They're structures. So Ghost Machine developed out of that pure need for something different. And yet our goals are we just want to be that corner in your comic shop where, if you're looking for a good book, if you
Mm-hmm.
like Batman or Spider-Man, someone can say, hey, those Ghost Machine books are really good. Try those out. If you
Mm-hmm.
want something slightly different, you like history, you like horror, you like science fiction, or you can read these. Hey, a book a kid could read. You can read these books.
Mm-hmm.
So our aspirations they sound kind of simplistic, but they're really quite difficult to do. Is we just want to produce great books that are different than every other books on the stand, and yet are told with mainstream sensibilities, beautiful artwork, and equality. But that's what Ghost Machine developed out of, is that our years of experience and our desire to do something new.
Excellent. I would recommend anybody who's listening, please go check it out at your local comic shops. We have a library app as well, and I've read a few of them on that, the Comics Plus that we offer. So they're there also. So go check them out. They are really good. He's not just promoting; he's telling the truth. I really like them. I mean, I've been reading for many, many years, and like you said, you know when a story is really good, it kind of hits you over here. And you're like, wow, that's quality stuff. And I gotta say that was a pleasant surprise to find that they were so good. So I've been in and out of comics here and there, and I lost kind of track of some of the creators, and then I see this, and I'm like, let me see. And lo and behold, it was very good. I'm not just saying that.
Thank you.
But all right, Jeff, I don't want to keep you too long. I do appreciate you coming on and discussing past, the present, and the future. And I wish you the best of luck with Ghost Machine. I don't think you'll need it, but you've got it.
Thanks so much. Well, thanks for the time, and
you're welcome.
And have a great week.
You too. Enjoy. Hope to see you around, maybe on a con or something.
Cool. All right. Take care.
All right. Take it easy. It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.